Amelia, a quiet widow, spends her days surrounded by memories of her late husband Elijah and their estranged son Matthew. When Matthew marries a charming woman named Valerie, Amelia is treated as an outsider at her own son's wedding, ignored, unseen, forgotten. But soon after, Valerie shows up at her door with a smiling notary and a simple favor, a power of attorney granting her full control over Amelia's finances and property. Something in Amelia's instincts awakens. Guided by Elijah's old letter, hidden in a locked box in the basement, she uncovers a secret inheritance he left her. 8 million pesos, shares, and land held solely in her name. Quietly, she moves her assets, builds an irrevocable trust, and seals it under her own authority. Days later, Valerie returns, pretending kindness, but Amelia is ready. Over tea and rosemary scones, she calmly slides her own folder across the table, proof that everything has already been secured irrevocably. The younger couple's smiles vanish. The silence that follows is sharper than any argument. When their manipulative messages arrive afterward, Amelia deletes them without hesitation. Instead, she bakes, tends her garden, and begins a new chapter in a small cottage near a library, where she joins a group of older women who plant, laugh, and heal quietly together. Months later, Matthew reappears, broken and humbled, holding a white envelope. He admits his mistake, his blindness, his guilt. Amelia forgives him, but reminds him softly, forgiveness doesn't come with a key. When he leaves, she places the envelope under the ceramic owl on her windowsill, unopened. That night, she writes not to her son or her husband, but to the woman she used to be, the one who believed peace meant silence. She tells her, "You can stop holding your breath now." The next morning, Amelia kneels barefoot in the dew, her hands in the soil as new sunflowers tilt toward the light. For the first time in years, she feels not loss but freedom. I passed the morning ironing the soft blue shawl that Elijah had given me the year Matthew was born. It still smelled faintly of cedar, even though I kept it in a fabric drawer. The carved jewelry box that had taken me 3 weeks to make was wrapped in tissue paper, tied with a navy blue ribbon. I had lined the compartments with velvet and engraved a small inscription on the underside of the lid, for things too precious to lose. It wasn't expensive, just something that came from my hands and my story. The place was a resort with a glass facade, whitewashed stone, and chandeliers that tried too hard. I entered alone. A young woman at the reception desk looked up, smiled absently, and handed me a tag with my name, Amelia. No mother of the groom. No golden edge like the one belonging to Valerie's mother. Hers had a small white ribbon underneath her name that said VIP family in cursive letters. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to ask, but the girl was already helping the next guest. The hall was warm, vibrating with that kind of excitement that doesn't know where to place you if you don't move to its rhythm. Valerie's family was everywhere. Her uncles in tailored jackets, her cousins in champagne-colored dresses, everyone laughing as if they had known each other forever. I stayed on the sidelines, finally guided to a table near the back marked Friends of the Couple. The man beside me sold orthopedic mattresses. The woman on the other side raised alpacas in Oregon. Neither knew Matthew. They spoke over me as if I were part of the decor. When the dancing began, I saw Matthew cross the floor. He looked good, an impeccable suit, his father's chin. He danced with Valerie, then with her mother, then with an older aunt wearing silver bracelets. I waited with my hands folded over my lap, ready for the moment he would turn, see me and smile. But he didn't. A photographer passed me twice and never lifted his camera. The song ended. Another began. And another. By the time dessert was served, I'd stopped expecting anything sweet. I folded my napkin carefully, placed it under the plate, and left without anyone noticing. 4 days later, Valerie appeared at my door. 4 days after the wedding, she stood on my porch with a small bakery box and a man I didn't recognize. She smiled as if she had always belonged there and extended the box. "Wedding cookies," she said. "I thought you might like something relaxing." The man beside her nodded politely but said nothing. He carried a slim briefcase and wore khaki pants pressed too neatly to be accidental. I stepped aside and let them in. We sat at the kitchen table where Matthew had once worked on school projects, and Elijah used to read the morning news. Valerie looked around and praised the light. "This house has good energy," she said. Her tone was sweet, but her eyes kept drifting toward her companion. He placed the briefcase on the table and opened it without ceremony. Valerie pulled out a neatly bound stack of documents with a fountain pen on top. "It's just a formality," she said. "A durable power of attorney in case anything ever happens." Matthew and I thought it would be useful. I lifted the first page. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear. Financial authority. Access to property. Immediate effect. The word agent appeared too many times. So did control. I didn't react. Instead, I served tea for the three of us and added a sugar cube to hers without asking. "Of course," I said. "I'll read it carefully." She smiled, satisfied, and slipped the packet back into her folder. The notary said nothing as he stood. He left shortly after. Then Valerie, touching my arm lightly before crossing the doorway. I watched them from the window as they walked away, her hand moving animatedly as she spoke. When the car disappeared, I took the packet to the study and slid it under a drawer filled with old letters and cancelled checks. I didn't need time to decide what to do with it. I only needed to remember what Elijah had warned me long ago. That night, I opened the basement door and turned on the light. The basement smelled the same as always. Old wood, cold stone, and a faint trace of varnish from the projects Elijah never finished. I hadn't gone down there in months. Not since before winter arrived. The steps creaked under my weight, a sound not of complaint but of memory. Behind the stacked paint cans and a rusted toolbox was the low cabinet Elijah had built into the wall. I knelt slowly, my knees stiff from the day's cold, and reached for the latch. The key was still hidden inside the hollow broom handle. He always liked clever hiding spots. I turned it once. The lock gave easily. The metal box inside was smaller than I remembered. I set it on my lap, brushed off a thin layer of dust, and lifted the lid. Folders labeled with precision, color-coded tabs, investment records, property deeds, a scanned copy of a land trust in New Mexico. At the bottom, between two bound packets, there was a letter in an envelope marked only with my name, Amelia, in Elijah's handwriting. I felt it in my chest before I touched it. I unfolded the paper slowly. It was brief. "I know you won't ask for help, even when you need it, so I made sure of everything. This is yours, not ours, not his. Yours. Don't tell Matthew. Not because I doubt him, but because I don't know what kind of man he'll become. If you ever have to choose between peace and pressure, choose yourself. Always love you, okay?" My hands didn't shake, but I felt something open inside me. A quiet rupture. The numbers in the attached documents were clear. A balance of more than 8 million pesos, spread across stocks, bonds, and a secondary property I hadn't known we still owned. All in my name, untouched, with no beneficiary listed, no power of attorney, no shared access. I closed the folder, opened it again, counted the zeros, then stood up, carried the box upstairs, and placed it under the light of my sewing room. The next morning I called Elijah's lawyer. The next morning I walked through the greenhouse in silence. The air inside was still. My breath fogged the glass in small clouds. I moved among the pots as I used to, checking the soil with the back of my fingers, touching leaves that grew without asking permission. Outside, the lake was motionless. Inside, something in me had shifted. Not out of panic, but out of clarity, like waking from a long dream and realizing you'd been preparing for this moment all along. I called Harold Fisher right after lunch. He sounded older but not diminished. When I mentioned Elijah, he paused. "He told me you might call one day. If you did, it would mean you were ready." 2 days later we met in his office. Once a garage. Nothing fancy, just paper dust and the smell of old leather files. I handed him the folders from the basement box. He read them line by line, nodding slowly. "I can build something solid," he said. "Discreet, closed. No one gets close unless you say so." We set up a private, irrevocable trust. The conditions were firm. Any transfer of control would require written confirmation from 2 independent physicians. Until then, I was the only one with access. I redirected all the shares, the accounts, even the land in New Mexico, each held under an inactive family entity that only Elijah and I had ever used. For executor, I named Blanche. We weren't close, but she had always been steady. No flattery, no hidden agenda. Just someone who returned every dish I ever lent her and never asked questions she couldn't answer herself. By the time I had managed to secure every piece of Elijah's legacy, it was protected. Not out of defense, but out of respect. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it so that the weight he left me wouldn't be wasted by hands that saw value only in what they could sign. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The wind brushed against the windows like an old friend passing by. In the morning, a new envelope waited at the gate. A week later, another arrived. Cream-colored, without a notary stamp, without a visit. Just a sheet of paper folded into thirds, with Valerie's neat handwriting in the corner. Simplified version, just for your peace of mind. Inside was a cleaner version of the same power of attorney. Softer wording, no legal seals, no apparent pressure. But the substance hadn't changed. Immediate access, total control, all just in case. That afternoon I called the bank. I didn't mention names. I simply asked whether any background checks had been conducted under mine. The woman on the phone put me on hold, then returned with hesitation in her voice. There had been an inquiry filed 2 weeks before the wedding. The name was Valerie Guzman Mendez. It had been done discreetly, but officially. They had started investigating before the vows were exchanged. I thanked her, hung up, and placed the envelope back on the counter. I didn't tear it, didn't write anything on it. I slid it into the drawer beneath the bread warmer, behind the curtain receipts and an old tax return. It belonged with the things that no longer needed attention. Then I took out the flour and lemons. The cookies came out more sour than usual. I had grated the peels too close, letting the bitterness through on purpose. I wrapped half of them in wax paper and stored them on the top shelf of the pantry, where only I could reach. The rest cooled silently on the rack. Later, I smoothed the kitchen towels and reread the shopping list, even though I hadn't added anything new. The house didn't feel tense, only still, as if it were waiting for me to name something it already knew. In the morning I drafted a message. Not long, just an invitation. Brunch, my place. No reason given, no details asked. I sent it without rereading it. Then I reached for the tin of scones and set aside 2. I prepared the table for 3. A small linen cloth, my best teacups, and the good butter softened just enough to spread. The rosemary scones had cooled on the rack, their scent floating gently through the kitchen. I placed 2 on a small plate and left one in the oven, untouched. The 3rd cup of tea steamed quietly between them. They arrived on time, coats immaculate, smiles warm in that rehearsed sort of way. Matthew kissed my cheek lightly, just like when he was in high school and needed to borrow the car. Valerie once again praised the light. "This house always feels so cozy," she said, folding her napkin precisely over her lap. I poured the tea, offered scones, and listened as Valerie began her script. "We spoke with a friend, someone who specializes in elder law," she said lightly. "He suggested a revised version. Nothing final, just provisional, to make things easier." She reached into her bag and pulled out another sleek matte folder, tied with a soft ribbon instead of a clip. She placed it between us, sliding it forward as if it were a gift. I said nothing. Instead, I reached for my own folder and laid it on top of hers. No ribbon, no warmth, just notarized signatures and a seal. Valerie hesitated, then opened it. Her eyes scanned the page once, then again, slower. Matthew leaned in. Neither of them spoke. Inside was the notarized confirmation of the trust, the assets from Elijah, now formally transferred. Irrevocable, private, protected, with medical clauses included, no possibility of cancellation, no conditions they could fulfill. "Everything is settled," I said softly, lifting my teacup. "No signature needed." Matthew blinked, his fingers trembling near his cup. Valerie smoothed the edge of her napkin on her lap more slowly this time. No one touched a scone. The rest of the meal was brief. They declined seconds. Matthew offered a strained smile as he stood. Valerie thanked me again for the tea, for my openness. I walked them to the door without another word. Then I stood by the window, watching as they got into the car. I saw them sit there for a moment before driving off. That afternoon I received a message. 3 days passed before I heard from him again. No call, just a text. You made this harder than it needed to be. I looked at the screen, my thumb hovering for a moment before pressing the block button. I never opened the message again. The toast on my plate had gone cold. I poured another cup of tea and left it untouched beside it. The next one came from Valerie 2 days later. We only wanted to help secure Matthew's future. If we were wrong, I hope you understand our intentions were good. It was neat, polished, leaving no space for emotion and none for me. I read it twice, searching for the edge, and found it in the word help. I found it again in secure. 2 words wrapped in courtesy, but sharpened underneath. They didn't want to help me. They wanted to help themselves with what was mine. I deleted both messages. No part of me wanted to archive what didn't deserve to be remembered. That night, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in months. Inside were birthday cards, a dried flower from Matthew's graduation, and an old USB drive. I plugged it into the laptop in the corner of the sewing room. A video appeared. Matthew was 10, sitting inside a blanket fort in the living room, holding a flashlight under his chin. "This is the story of the haunted hose," he said in a voice 2 octaves deeper than his own. I laughed in the background, my voice younger, lighter. I watched him gesture dramatically, fall back into a pile of pillows, and smile directly at the camera as if he knew I was smiling behind it. I watched it twice. Then I closed the laptop and put the drive back in the drawer. That night I didn't respond to either of them. I folded the kitchen towels, wiped the counter twice, and turned off the lights one by one. I didn't feel anger, didn't feel victory, just more silence. In the morning I walked to the post office and picked up the keys to my new home. The new cottage sat on a quieter street, tucked behind a wooden fence and a row of overgrown dogwoods. The windows stuck when I tried to open them. The floorboards creaked down the hallway as if they were trying to remember whom they once supported. I liked that. Nothing pretended here. I unpacked slowly, bringing only what mattered. The blue teapot, a framed photo of Elijah near the greenhouse, the old rocking chair he built for me the summer after Matthew left for college. Everything else stayed behind. Most mornings I walked to the library on Main Street, just a few blocks from the old pharmacy. It wasn't really about the books. It was the silence, the feeling of breathing beside others who didn't need to fill the air with sound. Behind the library, there was a plot of land no one claimed. We called it the back corner. No sign, no fence, just packed earth and weeds that had forgotten they were supposed to bloom. I started turning the soil one afternoon without a plan, just the quiet pull of my hands toward the ground. Joanna came a week later with a thermos of mint tea and a pair of mismatched gloves. Margaret came after, leaning on a cane she only used when someone was watching. Elena didn't say much at first, but she brought seeds wrapped in old newspaper and a loaf of bread that tasted faintly of rosemary and orange peel. We didn't talk about our children, not directly. When we did, it was more about the weather they left behind than about the storm they'd become. We planted tomatoes, then basil, and a single row of sunflowers we weren't sure would survive. There were no roles, no rules, just a quiet rhythm of showing up and digging. We watered ourselves more than we did the plants. I found myself humming again, low and aimless, as I brushed the dirt from my knees. The first sprout appeared after a week of rain, a small, stubborn, bright green curl. That night, I baked cookies and left them to cool on the windowsill. The next morning, a car I hadn't seen in months stopped across the street. The fog hadn't lifted when I noticed it parked there. It wasn't a delivery van or a neighbor's sedan. It was familiar the way memories are, blurred at the edges but shaped like something you once trusted. Matthew stepped out slowly without a coat, his hood pulled up against the cold. He looked older than I remembered. not just in his face, but in the way his shoulders curved inward, as if bracing for something that wouldn't come all at once. He didn't knock. He sat on the porch steps, hands clasped, elbows resting on his knees. I watched him from the window for a long moment. Then I opened the door and went out without speaking. We sat side by side, the wood cold beneath us. He held a white envelope in one hand, its edges bent from being turned over and over. "I see what I did now," he said. "I didn't then, but I do now." His voice was calm. No rehearsing, no performance. This time I nodded slowly, letting the words settle in the space between us. After a while I answered, "I forgive you," I said, "but forgiveness doesn't come with a key." He looked at the envelope, then at me. "I don't expect anything," he said. "I just wanted you to know that I see it now, what it cost. I didn't ask what was in the envelope. I didn't touch it." He placed it beside me, stood up, and began to walk down the steps. Without another word, I didn't call after him. When he turned the corner, I took the envelope, carried it inside, and set it beneath the ceramic owl on the windowsill. I didn't open it. That afternoon I went back to the garden behind the library. The basil had taken root, and 2 of the sunflowers were already pushing through the soil. I knelt beside Joanna and handed her the trowel. That night I wrote a letter, not to Matthew, not to Elijah, but to someone else. I baked a cake in the afternoon, when the light was low and warm against the kitchen tiles. Just 1 layer, lemon and poppy seed. With a thin glaze I poured from memory, without a recipe, without a reason beyond the simple desire to do it. While it cooled, I sat at the table with a sheet of paper I hadn't touched in years. I smoothed it out, uncapped the pen, and began to write. Not to Matthew, not to Elijah, but to the woman I used to be. The one who smiled at things that didn't deserve kindness, who believed love always meant giving in, always yielding ground to keep the peace. I didn't write much, just enough to say, asterisk, "You can stop holding your breath now." Asterisk, I told her the weight had been carried long enough, that silence isn't the same as safety, that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors you close behind you so you can sleep at night. I folded the letter and slid it between the pages of an old book I never finished, one I no longer needed. Some stories don't need endings, only release. After dinner, I set the cake on a small plate, lit a candle in the center, and turned off the ceiling light. There was no music, no applause, only the soft flicker of the flame and the hum of the refrigerator. I closed my eyes and made a wish. Not for anyone else, not for repair or return. I wished for stillness, for mornings without checking my phone, for afternoons spent in the soil with women who didn't need to ask what had been lost. I wished for the kind of peace that doesn't need to be spoken aloud to be real. When I opened my eyes, I blew out the candle in a single breath. The silence that followed didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like something I had earned. The next morning I woke before sunrise, put on my sweater, and went out to the garden barefoot. The dew was cold, the soil damp with promise. I picked up the trowel from the windowsill and knelt where the sunflowers had begun to lean toward the light.